A cold Christmas wind swept through the city as snow drifted beneath the glowing streetlights. But for Emily Carter, the chill in her heart felt far colder than the December night. She stood outside an elegant downtown restaurant with numb fingers wrapped around the sleeves of her wool coat, watching couples laugh behind golden windows while her own evening crumbled before it had even begun. She had almost convinced herself not to come at all. Blind dates had never brought anything but awkward silences and disappointment. Yet her best friend had insisted this one would be different. She had promised Emily that Christmas miracles sometimes arrive disguised as ordinary moments. Emily wished she had stayed home. Before we continue, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and stories that remind us humanity still matters, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories. Emily had spent nearly an hour preparing for the evening, not because she expected romance, but because she was tired of feeling invisible. At 32, life had not unfolded the way she once imagined. She worked long shifts as a children's librarian, earned just enough to pay rent for her small apartment, and carried quiet wounds she rarely spoke about. 3 years earlier, her fiancé had left her only weeks before their wedding, choosing ambition and convenience over promises. Since then, Emily had buried herself in books and routine, convincing herself she no longer needed dreams that involved another person. The restaurant glowed with Christmas decorations that looked almost unreal against the icy night. Pine garlands wrapped around polished railings, and soft music drifted through the entrance whenever the doors opened. Her date, Ryan, had already arrived when she stepped inside. He looked exactly like his photograph, well-dressed, confident, and polished in the effortless way successful people often appeared. At first, Emily allowed herself a cautious spark of optimism. But optimism, she would soon learn, could be painfully fragile. The conversation began politely enough, though something about Ryan's smile felt rehearsed. He asked about her work, but barely listened to her answers. When Emily spoke about helping shy children discover confidence through books, his attention drifted toward his phone. He spoke at length about luxury vacations, investment properties, and expensive wine, pausing only to evaluate her reactions. Emily tried to stay gracious, reminding herself that first meetings were rarely perfect. Then the evening shifted. Ryan casually asked where she lived and what kind of salary librarians earned. When Emily answered honestly, she saw disappointment harden across his face. His posture changed. His politeness faded. He laughed softly and said he had assumed she worked in publishing or something, more ambitious. He remarked that life required partners who matched each other socially and financially, especially for people with goals. The words struck harder than Emily expected. She had faced rejection before, but humiliation carried its own sting. Around them, Christmas lights shimmered while conversations and laughter continued as though nothing painful had happened. Ryan checked his watch, muttered that he had an early meeting, and ended the date less than 40 minutes after it began. Emily sat frozen while he paid his portion of the bill and walked away without looking back. For several moments, she could not move. The restaurant suddenly felt suffocating. She collected her coat and stepped outside into the freezing air, fighting the hot sting gathering behind her eyes. Snowflakes brushed against her cheeks like tiny shards of glass. She hated herself for caring, hated that after years of disappointment, rejection could still hurt this much. The city around her sparkled with holiday joy that felt painfully distant. Families hurried along sidewalks carrying shopping bags. Carolers sang near the plaza fountain. Somewhere nearby, church bells echoed through the evening. Emily began walking without direction. She crossed decorated streets and passed glowing storefronts until she reached a small Christmas market in the town square. Wooden stalls lined the plaza, selling handmade ornaments, cinnamon pastries, and steaming cups of cocoa. The scent of roasted chestnuts floated through the cold air. Normally, she loved places like this. Tonight, it only reminded her how alone she felt. She sat on a bench beneath a massive Christmas tree covered in silver lights. Children ran through the square laughing, while parents bundled them into scarves and mittens. Emily lowered her head and finally allowed herself to cry. Not loudly, just quietly enough that strangers would not notice. She cried for the failed date, for years lost to heartbreak, and for the loneliness she had grown skilled at hiding behind polite smiles. That was when she noticed them. Two identical little girls stood several feet away near the tree. They could not have been older than 6. Both wore matching red coats and knitted hats with white pom-poms. Their cheeks glowed pink from the cold, and they clutched paper cups of hot chocolate. At first, Emily assumed their parents were nearby. Then she realized the girls were staring at her. Before she could wipe her tears, the twins approached with hesitant curiosity. One of them gently held out a napkin. The gesture startled Emily so much she nearly laughed. Children, she thought, noticed sadness more honestly than adults ever did. The girls looked at her with solemn concern. And then one asked the question that would change everything. "Will you be our mom?" For a heartbeat, Emily forgot how to breathe. The words sounded so unexpected, so innocent, that she wondered if she had misunderstood. She looked around immediately for their parents. Nearby stood a man holding several shopping bags and watching the scene with visible alarm. He hurried toward them. He was tall, dark-haired, and carried exhaustion behind his eyes that no expensive coat could hide. Snow dusted his shoulders as he apologized repeatedly, clearly embarrassed. His name was Daniel Brooks, and his daughters, Lily and Lucy, apparently had a habit of saying whatever lived in their hearts. Daniel explained that the twins had recently become fascinated with the idea of Christmas miracles and had been asking impossible questions all month. Emily assured him it was fine and smiled awkwardly, still recovering from the strange encounter. Yet, as Daniel gently guided the girls away, something unexpected happened. Lucy turned back. She looked directly at Emily and said that sad people should not sit alone at Christmas. The words stayed with Emily long after they disappeared into the crowd. She expected that to be the end. It was not. As Emily prepared to leave the square, heavy snowfall suddenly intensified. Wind swept across the market, knocking over decorations and sending shoppers scrambling toward shelter. In the confusion, a frightened cry pierced the noise. Emily turned. One of the twins, Lily, had slipped near the fountain. Without thinking, Emily rushed forward. The icy pavement made walking dangerous, but she reached the child just before she tumbled against the stone edge. Lily clung to her coat, trembling more from fear than injury. Daniel arrived moments later, breathless and pale. Gratitude flooded his face. He thanked Emily again and again, clearly shaken by how quickly the situation had unfolded. The storm grew stronger. Market vendors hurried to close their stalls, and visibility worsened by the minute. Daniel insisted on buying Emily a coffee as thanks, while they waited for conditions to settle. Normally, she would have declined, but something about the twins' warmth and perhaps her own loneliness made her agree. They found shelter in a nearby cafe, decorated with candlelight and evergreen branches. Inside, the atmosphere felt almost magical. The twins spoke endlessly about Christmas cookies, school plays, and their dream of seeing real reindeer. Daniel listened with patient affection, though Emily noticed sadness beneath his gentle smile. As the evening unfolded, she learned pieces of their story. Daniel had lost his wife, Hannah, nearly 2 years earlier after a sudden illness. The grief had shattered their family. He had spent countless nights balancing work, parenting, and mourning while trying to remain strong for his daughters. The girls missed their mother deeply, especially during holidays, and Emily suddenly understood why their question had carried such heartbreaking sincerity. They were not being mischievous. They were searching for something missing. The realization tightened her chest. For the first time that night, Emily forgot about Ryan entirely. Hours slipped by unnoticed. She laughed more than she had in months. The twins adored her immediately, showing her drawings and asking endless questions about books and fairy tales. Daniel watched their happiness with quiet surprise. It had been a long time, he admitted, since he had seen them connect with someone so naturally. When the storm finally softened, midnight was approaching. Emily assumed they would part ways forever. Instead, Daniel hesitated. He thanked her again and asked whether she might join them the following afternoon at a Christmas charity event where the twins would be volunteering. Emily nearly refused out of habit. Then, she saw hope flickering inside two pairs of bright little eyes. And she said yes. The next day changed her life. The charity event served meals and distributed winter clothing to struggling families. Emily arrived expecting awkwardness, but found herself welcomed like an old friend. The twins ran toward her with unfiltered excitement. Daniel smiled when he saw her. Together they spent hours helping children choose toys and warming freezing hands with cocoa. Emily watched Daniel closely that afternoon. He was nothing like the man who had rejected her the previous evening. He noticed people. He remembered names. He carried kindness without performing it for attention. And somewhere between shared laughter and quiet conversations, Emily began feeling something unfamiliar. Not romance. Not yet. Just peace. But life rarely allows healing without testing it first. That evening, Emily overheard two women whispering near the donation tables. They recognized Daniel. Apparently, he owned a successful architectural firm and came from considerable wealth. The discovery startled Emily. Instantly, memories of Ryan's judgment returned. Fear crept in. Perhaps she did not belong in Daniel's world either. Perhaps kindness tonight would eventually become disappointment tomorrow. So she pulled away. For several days she ignored Daniel's messages, convincing herself distance was safer. Then, Christmas Eve arrived. Snow covered the city like silver silk. Emily spent the evening alone in her apartment, wrapping donated books for children. But loneliness returned stronger than before. And then her phone rang. Daniel's voice sounded worried. The twins had prepared something for her and refused to sleep until she came. Emily almost declined. Then she remembered Lucy's words. Sad people should not sit alone at Christmas, so she went. Just before the ending, we have a special request for you. Tell us in the comments, do you believe Christmas miracles still happen in real life? Daniel's home glowed with warmth and candlelight when she arrived. The twins raced toward her carrying handmade ornaments. One ornament showed 4 stick figures holding hands beneath a Christmas tree. Emily's heart stopped. The girls looked nervous. They explained that families did not always begin the same way, but sometimes people found each other after sadness. Tears filled Emily's eyes. Daniel stood quietly nearby. Then, he told her something she never expected. The girls had spoken about her constantly, since the night they met, and he, too, had been afraid to hope again after losing Hannah. Afraid to open doors grief had sealed shut. But Emily had brought light back into their home. Not by replacing anyone, simply by being herself. If this story has touched your heart so far, please like the video, share it with someone you love, and subscribe to support more emotional stories that celebrate hope and humanity. Emily looked around the room. The fireplace glowed softly. Snow drifted beyond the windows, and 2 little girls watched her with hearts completely open. For years she had believed rejection defined her worth. Ryan's cold judgment had seemed to confirm every insecurity she carried. But standing there, surrounded by imperfect, yet genuine love, Emily understood something powerful. Sometimes rejection is not the end of the story. Sometimes it is the painful redirection that guides us toward where we truly belong. The twins hugged her tightly, and through tears and trembling laughter, Emily whispered that she would love to keep being part of their lives one day at a time. Outside, Christmas bells rang through the snowy night. Inside, 4 wounded hearts began healing together. And for the first time in years, Emily no longer felt invisible. She felt home.